On day 6 I started working on the third person character controller. This is the same one that I showed off in the original teaser trailer. And this thing took a lot of hard work to get right. From how high it could hop, to how it would handle the player's input. Something that I always loved about animation is how inanimate objects move. And this was my attempt to bring that to life in Engine. The first thing that I looked for was inspiration. Not just in movies, but in games too. Because I just wanted to see what others' approaches were when it came to designing them. That search led me to my two biggest inspirations. Double Fine's 2011 game Stacking and Hanna-Barbera's Scooby-Doo. Stacking was the perfect blueprint for this, with it having that light hopping motion that will replicate what a toy would walk like. And then there's Scooby-Doo. I've always liked how Shaggy runs, with him kind of leaning forward like if he's off balance or something. I wanted to capture that energy in this controller, so now when you move, the character leans towards the direction you're going.
My ears burn!
The bike also received a few improvements, with me adding better handling, a way to make the player's movement feel smoother and less constricted while riding. I also added a way for the player to get off the bike without clipping into the geometry. A problem I had was that when the player would get off the bike and they were too close to a wall, they would end up clipping into it. So the easiest way that I found to prevent this from happening was by casting two gizmo spheres on opposite sides of the bike. And if one of them detected a game object with a tag wall, it would turn red and make it so the player would exit from the other side instead. On day 7 I started working on a big update that has been a long way coming, with it being lively buttons. More than having this big, ugly text show up in the bottom of the screen, we have the interaction key track the interactable game object, with the key that you have locked as the interaction key being displayed. The first idea that came to mind while working on this was to use the same approach that they used in mouthwashing. In mouthwashing, the interactable game objects are surrounded by these two anchors that adjust to the size of the game object and track it as the player moves the camera. And while the text on screen object worked just fine, it looked way too jarring and it would kind of ruin any immersion for the player. The biggest roadblock that I experienced while implementing this was figuring out how the tracking would even work. I tried multiple things like displaying the UI image and TextMesh Pro as worldwide, and then adding a look at player script so they always face the camera and I didn't have to worry about tracking the image. But that would also mean that I would have to make it a prefab that had to be parented to every single game object, and then I would have to modify their scripts and blah 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 blah. The second idea was to cast a ray from the player's camera, and if it hit the interactable game object, a static image would display on screen. But that was the complete opposite of what I wanted to do. And after a few hours of work, I ended up stumbling on this YouTube video on how to implement mission viewpoints in Unity 3D, with then displaying the TextMesh Pro and image in a separate canvas layer and tracking it in real time through the code. So I did what any great programmer would do, and I politely copied the code and I put it into the game, and it worked just great. But I had to completely rework the code for it to work how I wanted it to. While the object tracking worked great, I ended up deleting the code that made the image stick to the corners of the screen when the player looked away from it. So I instead made it so the image would fade out, making it look like if it stayed in place. I also made it so when the player moved, the image would stay in the target and update its position, keeping it aligned with the player's view. Then I added some code that made it so when the player entered the interactable game object's trigger, it would fade in and fade out. On day 8, after implementing lively buttons, I started working on some more quality of life improvements, like the grab and drop, with it also having a huge update, with it also supporting the lively button update. In this quality of life update, the player is able to switch, grab and drop, and put objects in their inventory. This update was mainly done to make the grab and drop mechanic less exhausting for the player, because I found out that having to constantly grab and drop the object would become extremely tiring really quickly, especially if you're only grabbing an object just to look at it. So now you no longer have this problem. If you're in the midst of stacking a bunch of pickups and you just want to quickly grab one and just look at it and then drop it and continue stacking, now you can. And like I said, I also added an inventory. Well, kinda, not really. Just hear me out, please! Now when you pick up objects for your very real, very finished inventory, you will get a live view of all the objects you've picked up. And to top it off, I added this cool animation that plays when you pick up a copy or duplicate game object. In other quality of life improvements, I added a dither effect to some game objects. What I found out is that there are some game objects that the player can easily clip into, especially when you're in token mode. So after searching how to make the dither effect using Unity's URP renderer, I stumbled on a video made by the GOATs of the Unity render pipeline, Daniel Illett and Pablo Makes, which they both made wonderful tutorials on how to make the effect, but also how to set up and learn the basics of URP. This was especially good for me because from this point on, all my games were made using Unity's standard render pipeline, and when it came to making shaders, they would be programmed using Unity's custom shader. So it was a bit hard adapting to the new renderer. But thanks to Daniel and Pablo, I was able to learn the basics of the URP renderer. Both their videos will be linked in the description. Something that I unfortunately learned about working on this project was that Studio Massa isn't the greatest when it comes to continuity. This issue mostly shows up in the first deals, since all the later ones have phenomenal backgrounds. While most of the scenes in the first deal look fine, some of the ones set in the Soppenborg house make no sense. I actually tried mapping out the house using screenshots from the deals, promotional art, and the comics, but I still felt like I was going insane, like,
is there actually a ceiling light in the hallway, or was that just added as a one-time thing?
how many godforsaken windows does Maya even have?
Was there an extra door in Maya's room, or was it just a figment of my imagination?
Why do they call it oven when you are eating?
So hey, I'm editing Sunday here at like 3 in the morning. This whole section is wrong. I was just an idiot and I got the order of the runes messed up, and the brain developer part of my brain that has spent over a month working on this level is clamoring to find an excuse. Like, this was intentional, but I just need to be honest, I will have to fix it. I added this joke talking about, the mysterious door, but at the same time there was no door to begin with. But the room still sucks, like why the fuck is there just a window? But luckily for me, a few equally dedicated and unhinged Ongezellig fans have been able to completely recreate the house out of scratch in The Sims. So huge shout out to insert name here for making that video, incredibly helpful when it came to building that level. On day 9 I gave the game's UI a massive redesign, with it all being completely redesigned to make it align more with the game's art style. First I made it so all the UI text used Studio Massa's font, and second I created
Text Mesh Prefects.
This script allows the developer to select and apply multiple text mesh pro animations on the text in an attempt to make it feel a bit more alive. I also added a bunch of new assets that will be needed in future levels, like a drawer and a vending machine. That has really come in handy to spawn developer tools. The drawer basically just works by using the same system that the dialect system uses. The script checks if the player is inside the trigger, if so the script checks if the player is looking at the drawer, and if the player is looking at it, they can interact with it. And that's it. If you stick out to the end, thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry that this video came out a bit later than expected. This last few months have been extremely stressful and I haven't been able to fully focus on the game. The main reason being that I'm back at school, and the second one being more personal IRL stuff. Like I said in the beginning of the video, this is showing a lot of early development footage, so prepare to see more stuff in future uploads. And yeah, this has been Sunday. Like if you like, dislike if you dislike, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and see you in the next one.